Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this year's publishing preview from Milkweed Editions. I'm Anna Thorson, Senior Advancement Officer, and I first want to say thank you. Thank you for making the time to be with us this afternoon. Milkweed is a nonprofit independent publisher. Our mission, as some of you know well, is to identify, nurture, and publish transformative literature and build an engaged community around it. In a few moments, Daniel Slager, our publisher and CEO, will speak to the first part of that mission, acquiring, developing, and publishing books that change the way people see and live in the world, specifically those books that we are most excited to publish this year. But you all are a vital part of the second half of that mission. Without you, our engaged community, there would be no Milkweed. When you make a donation, purchase a book, or read a Milkweed title and tell your friends about it, you're investing in our authors and their work and helping their important stories and messages reach a wider audience. Thank you for helping us fulfill our mission by being and building the Milkweed community. And special thanks to our Kaleidoscope members in attendance today. You are the leaders of Milkweed's philanthropic community, and we are so grateful for your interest, enthusiasm, and support. Before I introduce Daniel, I want to encourage you, as it says in the chat, to please ask questions today. You can do so by dropping them in the chat. So Daniel, as I've mentioned, is publisher and CEO, though like most job titles, that is hardly descriptive of the many hats he wears here. Prior to joining Milkweed as editor-in-chief in 2005, he was a senior editor at Harcourt Trade Publishers in New York. Daniel also happens to be a widely published translator from the German, including a book-length translation of Auguste Rodin by Rilke, which was awarded the American Translator Association's Unger Prize. Here at Milkweed, Daniel is our chief strategist and storyteller, and somehow masterfully balances all the duties that running the organization entails with acquiring and editing books, some of which you'll hear about right now. So Daniel, the screen is yours.
Good afternoon, y'all. Thanks very much, Anna, for those kind words. And thanks, let me echo Anna in thanking you all for joining us this afternoon. I'm delighted to be with you. I really look forward to in-person events before long. I really miss them. This kind of event is richer that way, but this is still a nice opportunity and I'm grateful for it. And so thank you for making the time. I have a lot to talk about because we have a lot going on here at Milkweed Editions these days. Let me begin by just saying that, calling your attention to a few highlights from 2021, setting the stage for what we're doing in 2022. Because here at Milkweed, we have seen, we're in the midst of a growth spurt, I think it's fair to say. And much of the growth in our organization has been coming in earned income from sales, particularly over the last few years, which is wonderful. More than most nonprofit arts organizations, we rely on earned income to make our organization run. It's a higher percentage of our revenue overall. And then also, sales are a good way to measure the impact of our work because most readers who engage with the content we're publishing have purchased a copy of a book. For that reason, I'm especially delighted to share with you all that our sales have really been growing in recent years, along with the impact of our work. Our distributor has some 125 client publishers. 3 years ago, we were the 22nd of them, as measured by sales, and today we're the 7th. So we've really been growing. Our sales have reached a level that is entirely unprecedented in our field of nonprofit independent literary presses. And really the sales are growing across our list with revenue generated by sales of printed books, by ebooks, by audiobooks, sales through our distributor, direct sales, and sales of rights to foreign publishers and audiobook publishers. So our books are getting into more readers' hands. And as Anna alluded to, changing the way more and more readers see and live in the world, which is what I really find most gratifying and most impactful about our work. A few highlights from our publishing program in 2021. In all modesty, they would be too numerous to list comprehensively here. But a few of the highlights, we published a book in the fall by Victoria Chang, Dear Memory, which is already into a second printing and was featured prominently in the New Yorker. The Seed Keeper, a novel by Diane Wilson, made Ms. Magazine's list of the best books of 2021 and is in its 5th reprint already since its publication last spring. Margaret Renkel's second book with us, Graceland at Last, won the Southern Book Prize and is currently a finalist for the Penn Literary Awards in the essay category. In fact, I'll be at that award ceremony this coming Monday evening in New York City. My first time in New York since the beginning of the pandemic. I'm really excited about it. Dara McAnulty's Diary of a Young Naturalist was featured in the New York Times, led to Dara being named one of Outside Magazine's Outsiders of the Year. And then finally, from this short list, Worldly Things, a collection of poems by Michael Claber Diggs, the 2021 Max Ritvo Poetry Prize winner, has been and continues to be a national sensation and has already been reprinted as well. So we obviously enter 2022 with great momentum. And fortunately, we're well positioned to build on it. We published 26 titles last year. And in 2022, we have 31 titles scheduled for publication. From top to bottom, it's the strongest list we've ever published here at Milkweed, at least since I've been here. Certainly the most books. And so without further ado, I would like to call your attention and to kind of introduce, if necessarily superficially, because of the time constraint today, 7 or 8 of the books I think are among our lead titles in 2022. Beginning with the title called Thin Places, A Natural History of Healing at Home. This is a debut nonfiction book by an Irish writer. She was born in Derry on the border of the north and south of Ireland in the very height of the Troubles. She was brought up on what she describes as the wrong side of the town. One parent was Catholic, one parent was Protestant. There was really no right side for a child in that situation. When she was 11 years old, they were forced out of 2 homes. There was a bomb thrown through a window of their home. It was a terrible way to grow up. She grew up in the midst of a vicious sectarian violence. And this book, not a novel, really a combination of memoir, history, and natural history, traces her recovery of a kind of sanity and from this traumatic childhood in the natural world. And it contains some of the most beautiful writing about the natural world I've ever encountered. In fact, I described the send-up of the book briefly, but if I had to describe in a line what's most distinctive about this book, it is Carrie's writerly voice, which is at once vulnerable and big-hearted and remarkably intelligent. I acquired this book. It had been published in the UK by an independent publisher called Canongate. Most of the books we publish, we develop here in our editorial workshop. But in this case, the book had been published in the UK. I thought it was a perfect fit for our list because we've published so much environmental literature in recent years so well. And yet, because of her experience in the Troubles and because of her perspective as an Irish woman, she also adds something quite singular to American nature writing. And then I thought, we're publishing, one of the reasons we've been succeeding with our list, especially recently, is that we've been publishing the books on our list in increasingly innovative ways. And so we commissioned a book trailer for this book, and it hasn't been shared with the public yet, but I'd like to share it with you now. It's only a minute or so, but it will also give you a break from me. So without further ado, I'd love to share this book trailer.
No more. Enough already. The moment is here to leave. I have carried too much sorrow into this water for one lifetime. The tide is shifting. The moment in Derry, in the north, across the UK in general, is uncertain and full of that same hidden violence I spent my childhood stepping over, like delicate eggshells, just waiting for it to erupt I cannot and will not live through it all again. I am making ready to leave the city in which I was born. I am leaving its feathery ghosts here, where its river meets the sea.
Thank you. I'm sure I'm not alone in this gathering in having been affected over the last day or so by what's going on in the Ukraine. And so somehow this feels especially meaningful today, this kind of a voice emerging from sectarian violence and war. And we need more voices like this, obviously. It carries us a beautiful one. And booksellers have been responding to it. So we have high hopes for Thin Places. The second book I'm going to talk about briefly today is The Hurting Kind, a new collection of poems by our Ada Limon. This is her fifth collection of poems, her fourth with us. The last one was a stunning national success. National awards. It's astonishing how many copies of these books we sell now. Ada's audience has really grown with each passing book. The 2 books ago, her book was a finalist for the National Book Award. Her last book, The Carrying, won the National Book Critics Circle Award. Ada is now the host of the American Public Media launched podcast and radio program, The Slowdown, which, if you're interested in poetry, I highly recommend. There have been a number of these podcasts popping up, of course, but Ada does a really beautiful job featuring individual poems and poets and unpacking their work. Ada has a great gift for being simultaneously profound and entirely unpretentious. And so I recommend The Slowdown, but these poems also all have that remarkable combination of sophistication and lack of pretension. Her work is so approachable, which is what has really helped her find a broad audience for her work. This book, if I had to summarize what it's about interconnectedness between the human and the more than human, between generations, between ancestors and ourselves, and between friends and among families. It's a really incredible collection of poems, and we have very high hopes for its publication in April. And then on to our first novel. I'm delighted to report that Ken Kalfus is returning to Milkweed's list. Milkweed published 2 collections of stories by Ken more than a decade ago, nearly 2 decades ago. They were critically acclaimed. One of them, PU 239, was made into an HBO film. And then Ken went on to several novels, 2 novels, I believe, with New York publishers, one of which was a finalist for the National Book Award. I've been in touch with Ken since I first came to Milkweed in 2005, and I was so delighted when his agent submitted this novel to me. It's a somewhat sinister but also funny novel, if that makes any sense. It's set in the future, and so which makes it speculative fiction, really. It's set 10 to 20 years in the future. The protagonist is as the novel begins, is a young American man who has left an America recently descended into a state of civil war for exile in an unnamed city abroad. He finds himself in an enclave in this city called Little America, which has carried over from America to this enclave of a foreign city in a following, again, a civil war in America. There's, again, a kind of a sectarian, tribalist atmosphere in the midst of a heavy surveillance state. And this American repairman, Ron Patterson, is moving around in this context. And so I think it's very much a novel for our times, in these times of increasingly kind of tribalist politics, where so often we find ourselves talking past each other especially in the political sphere. But as is always the case with Ken, it has this very distinctive kind of comedy also, and sense of irony, even while there is a sense of ominous suspense building throughout the novel. We know that the book has been assigned for review in the New York Times Book Review already. Ken's work has always been well reviewed. I'm really excited to see that. We got a wonderful blurb from Jonathan Safran Foer, who is has been a best-selling contemporary novelist, a little younger than Ken, who describes this book as the best book by one of the best living American writers. And so that will help us find some readers for this book and for Ken. It's a really stunning piece of work, unlike any novel I've ever edited before. And because Ken has been such an idol to me for so many years as a novelist, it was really a thrill for me to work with him to develop the manuscript. And he's a wonderfully gracious man. And really excited to publish this book also this spring, 2 a.m. in Little America. And then moving on, another collection of poems. I wanted to highlight this book, and I want to move relatively, continue moving along because I want to leave some time for your questions and comments near the end of our hour together. This book, The Wanting Way by Adam Wolfond, will be the second book in a new series we're publishing beginning this year called Multiverse. Multiverse will include poets who are, most of them autistic. Neurodivergent is the preferred term by many now. Adam Wolfond this is his first collection of poems, is a non-speaking autistic young man. And this is a really, this whole notion of this series was brought to me by one of our editors at large, Chris Martin, who is himself a poet and neurodivergent. He'll be curating the series for us. And there's been I didn't really know very much about this, but the way he introduced the subject to me was that there's been an astonishing community coming into shape and focus of neurodivergent poets, many of them non-speaking, writing absolutely stunning poems. And so this series of poems, Multiverse, will include work by such writers. And this book will be the second book we publish this year. The first, also by a non-speaking autistic young woman named Hannah Emerson, is coming out this spring. But I'm particularly excited about this, and I just love the cover. And we've already had some really beautiful early attention for this book. And I'm really excited to make our list more inclusive of this kind of artistry and creativity and community. And so that's Adam Wolfond and The Wanting Way and Multiverse. PERMA Red, another novel, is a reprint of a novel that was published about 20 years ago by a commercial New York house and then let go out of print. It was part of a 2-book acquisition for me. Deborah is an Indigenous woman who grew up on the Flathead Indian Reservation in northern Montana. This novel is set on the reservation and features as its protagonist a young woman, Louise White Elk. It's a really one of the best representations I've read in fiction of life on a reservation. It's doubly difficult, Louise White Elk's life is, because she's a young woman growing up on this reservation. So not only obviously is she on a reservation and dealing with all the historical trauma of settler colonialism, but she's also a young woman trying to navigate a relatively male-dominated reservation. It is absolutely gorgeously written. Won an American Book Award when it was published 20 years ago, and I'm so honored to bring it back into print with our edition in the fall. I should say also that it's been a real pleasure and privilege for me to work with Deborah to develop the second novel, which will be an original publication for us in the spring of 2023. The title of that novel is The Lost Journals of Sacagawea, and it is a fictional send-up, as the title would describe, of journals of Sacagawea, the indigenous. She was taken as a girl by Lewis and Clark and their traveling party and then served that expedition as an interpreter, and has always appeared in conventional American history as a young woman. In fact, historians now agree she was likely no older than 12 or 13 years old when she was captured, abducted, really. And so there's obviously some, this is not PERMA read, but the Lost Journals of Sacagawea. And with these two novels, I really believe we can reestablish Deborah Magpie Erling as one of America's leading Indigenous novelists. And I'm really profoundly excited to do that. That's PERMA read, publishing this fall. Some of you will remember we published a novel, Driftless, which was David Rhodes' return to American letters. We published that novel in, I think it was 2008 or 2009. It had been 25 years since David had published a novel. He was in a motorcycle accident after his first 3 novels were published in the 70s. Paralyzed from the chest down, he's a paraplegic today. And when he returned to the scene with Driftless in, again, the late 2000s, the book was a national sensation and a great hit for us at Milkweed. It portrayed a community in the Driftless region of southwestern Wisconsin, really lent that community and the characters in the novel a beautiful dignity not often given to characters from rural scenes in American fiction today. And then we published a sequel to Driftless called Jewelweed several years later, which followed some of the same characters. This new novel, Painting the Walls, has been a decade or so in the works. It too, as with 2 AM Little America, is set in the future. And in this novel, one of the characters who will, so those of you who've read Driftless and or Jewelweed will remember young August Helm. In this novel, he's an adult and he's a biophysicist working at a lab at the University of Chicago, exploring, and he becomes interested over the course of this novel in the role of sexuality and reproductive drive in really in shaping and motivating so much of human society, so much more than we think of on a day-to-day basis. David pitched this novel to me in a public library in River Falls, Wisconsin, nearly a decade ago. I agreed to give him an advance based both on the success of those 2 novels we had developed together and then published successfully here, and the promise of this premise at work in Painting the Walls. Subsequent to that contract in advance, David developed cancer and moved from Wisconsin down to Iowa City for treatment. He's now a survivor and was able to finish the novel last year. We've been through quite a few rounds of editorial revision. I think there have definitely been days when David was irritated with me for pushing for more and more revision. But the resulting novel is so rich, and again is set primarily, the protagonist moves from Chicago back to the Driftless region in southwestern Wisconsin, reconnects with some of the friends who appeared again as characters in Driftless and Jewelweed. Now their community has been separated by gated communities of kind of ultra wealthy Americans who parachuted in from other parts of the country because it's viewed as one of the last sort of rustic parts of the country. And in this novel, we trace August Helm's kind of philosophical reflections on the dynamics I described earlier. I think I have really high hopes for this book. It is filled with David's generosity of spirit and humanity that all who read Driftless and Jewelweed will remember. It is a really beautiful piece of work, and we'll publish this novel this fall. I'm not absolutely sure this title will stay. We're still debating on that, but the novel is finished and back from the copy editor, and will reestablish David, I believe, as one of the major voices in contemporary American fiction. And then some of you will remember reading Body of Water, Chris Dombrowski's first work of nonfiction. When we were working on that book, it feels a long time ago now, I was so impressed with Chris's artistry and his industriousness and his talent that I offered him a contract before Body of Water was published for a second book on the strength of a proposal. That second book has become The River You Touch, Learning the Language of Wandering Home, which is a bit more memoir than Body of Water was. If that book, Body of Water, took as its subject David Pinder and bone fishing, chiefly in the Bahamian archipelago, the subject of this book, if I had to describe it briefly, and I do now, is becoming a father in the Anthropocene, in a place, Missoula, Montana, which has largely transitioned from kind of a center of extractive industries into a center for people working in conservation and ecotourism, ski bums, the kinds of people. Chris himself makes his living partly as a fly fishing guide, and so he knows whereof he speaks. And his friends and the community he's built and the family he's built, he and his wife raising 3 children there, and trying to build a life of integrity at this time, in a time of visible climate change and environmental degradation, makes this book really unlike any other work of contemporary memoir I've read. It's been and Body of Water was a very successful book for us. And so Chris has a readership. His platform has only grown since Body of Water. And I just really love working with Chris, and really excited to publish this book. I think it will broaden his already considerable audience. And then finally, we have 2 books in our Seed Bank series scheduled for publication this year. This book, Walking the Ojibwe Path by Richard Wagamez, subtitled A Memoir in Letters to Joshua, is the paperback edition of the book that was published as a hardcover as To Joshua in the month the pandemic hit, so March 2020. Richard Wagamez, a wonderful Ojibwe writer who grew up in Ontario, attended reservation boarding schools, and then this book takes the form of letters to the son he was estranged from, due not least to his challenges with alcohol and substance abuse. He reconnected with his son and got sober by way of rediscovering his Ojibwe heritage. And so it's a beautiful kind of closing of the circle in his own life, and also a beautiful document of a developing relationship with his son, and a sharing with his son of the heritage, the cultural heritage Richard rediscovered that really enabled him to survive as a human being. And so this is a book that, because it elucidates an Ojibwe cosmology and entails elements of Richard's own experience, obviously, is a natural fit with our Seed Bank series of works of world literature exploring the human relationship to place and the more than human world from a very wide range of perspectives. With this publication, 4 of the 6 books in our Seed Bank series come from Indigenous writers from all over the world, from the beginning with the Mayan creation epic, the Popol Vuh, to Yuri Ritku's When the Whales Leave, an Indigenous Chukchi writer from Eastern Siberia, now Richard Wagamez. And these books are really beginning to find their way in American letters and into readers' hands by way of booksellers. So that is so exciting for us to see. And that is, so again, we have 25 new books scheduled for publication this year. This is but 7 or 8 of them, but a representative sampling. And so again, we find ourselves at a really exciting moment. I think that it's one thing to talk about sales and our sales growth. I really like to think of our sales as being suggestive of the extent to which the culture currently, our culture and our society, needs these voices today and is hungry for these voices today. And I think that's why we're finding resonance for them. That, along with some increasingly innovative publishing, and some grit and hard work and maturation as a publisher. And so that is my excessively hasty and superficial, regrettably, because I could talk about each of these projects for hours, and some of them have resulted from hundreds of hours of editorial collaboration. And I really have only been able to scratch the surface in terms of what we're doing to publish them effectively. But I also did want to leave some time for your questions and conversation. And so I think I will look to the chat now and see what is coming up.
I'm going to chime in and say, please don't be shy. Ask your questions. Even if you're willing to ask them live, I can also allow you to do that. Or if you prefer to ask them in the chat, that is great too. But thank you. Got plenty of time.
Wonderful to see your name, Vina. I missed being in contact with you more often. Thank you for that.
Daniel, can I ask you a question? Maybe
Please.
I'll break the ice. Can you talk a little bit about what goes into acquiring the rights for international books like Thin Places? That book is one I'm especially excited about. I mean, do you actively seek these titles out? I know you touched on it, and do you see that being an area of growth that Milkweed continues to grow?
Well, I think that one of our strategic objectives as a publisher is to become the world's leading publisher of ecological literature or environmental literature. And we can only develop so many projects ourselves with our current capacity. And so partly this is pragmatically supplementing the work we're doing in our publishing program and the focus of our publishing program with great work that aligns with our values and our mission and our list that's coming from all over the world. And so this is not a first for us. We've published Australian writers, British writers, Irish writers, and writers in translation from all over the world. And as for how I learn of them, I've been going to rights fairs for a couple decades now. The biggest of them is in Frankfurt every year. Of course, it's been a bit on hiatus the last couple of years, but I'll be back there this October, I assume. I also have been going to the London Book Fair. I've been there 15 or 20 times. And I have cultivated over the years relationships with foreign publishers like Canongate. And so when they have something they think would be a great fit with what we're doing, they send it to me. And we take a look. We obviously turn down a lot more than we take. But this one, I'm so pleased I took because it's such a great fit for us and it's finding such early resonance. I should add too, Anna, and thanks for the good question, that the traffic also, the more we engage in bringing more internationally here, the more we're also engaging in selling rights to foreign publishers to publish books we've originated here in their territories, which gives me a real thrill to see our books traveling like that, reaching that many more readers. Super
exciting. Well, I've succeeded. I broke the ice. Now there are several questions in the chat.
Yeah, let me begin with Lynn's comment about, or a question about Deborah Magpie Erling. I actually met Deborah by way of an anthology we published called Hearth. We published the book maybe 3 or 4 years ago. She had an essay in it. If I take anthologies, it's both because I think the books are a great addition to our list and I'm looking to build relationships with the writers who are in the anthology. And Deborah was a good example of that. I had read PERMA Read some 20 years ago. I got a chance to introduce myself when we were putting together that anthology and to express my admiration for her work. We began a correspondence, and before I knew it, I was out in Missoula meeting with her, talking about the lost journals of Sacagawea. Subsequent to that, I've been out twice more to work with her on the manuscript, and she's become a wonderful collaborator and a friend, frankly. And so, but that's how I originally met her, and that was the beginning of our relationship. I knew when I first heard about the lost journals of Sacagawea that I wanted to publish the book, and I also knew that only Deborah could write the book. And the book is completely brilliant. So that I cannot wait to publish that book in the spring. I'm really excited about it. Let's see. Yeah, thank you, Chris, for your good question. We added 3 editors at large last year, and really each of the 3 is contributing in different ways. I mentioned that Chris Martin is curating Multiverse. Chris originally came into my office with some poems by some of these neurodivergent poets, and he said he runs a kind of a writing workshop, a virtual writing workshop, where he works with neurodivergent writers and students to develop their work. And he said, I'm discovering an incredibly rich community and artistic scene, and explained to me what it was, and then said, I have this work. I think there's a series in this, and I was wondering if you could recommend a publisher who would be a good fit for this kind of series. And he never ended up getting anywhere else with that idea. And Chris became an editor at large. Another of our 3 editors at large is Fadi Judah, the Palestinian-American poet. We've published 2 of his collections of books, poems. The one we published last, Tethered to Stars, was a Library Journal Best Book of 2021. There too, I began developing a really rich correspondence with Fadi. I really liked his sensibility. I had a feeling that because of how active he is in the poetry scene, he would be in a position to bring writers to our list that weren't coming to me, that wouldn't have come to me otherwise. And so I asked him if he would consider doing it around the same time I engaged Chris. And then the 3rd editor at large is a woman named Helen Wybrow, who was formerly a senior editor for Norton, and then for many years a freelance editor, who is not interested in being a full-time editor because she also runs a working farm in Vermont. So my collaboration with her is limited to really the winter months, and up to mud season in Vermont around April, early May. And between late May and the end of August, Helen Wybrow, our 3rd editor at large, has a team of 30 or 40 seasonal workers working for her on her farm. Blueberries, fruit, was an incredible collaborator. And Helen has been primarily a developmental editor, although she did just bring a book that we're going to be acquiring to me in the last 2 weeks, the first in our relationship. But to this point, Helen has been helping me develop manuscripts, projects really that I had acquired. And so these 3 editors at large, and I hope to add more of them, are contract relationships. They're not staff positions. They're contract relationships where they're on a retainer, and the understanding is they're either bringing a certain number of books a year, or they're editing a certain number of books a year for us. And thus far, the relationships, which are new, they're less than a year old, have completely exceeded my expectations for what this kind of working relationship could be. In the process, part of what I've tried to describe is, forgive the long-winded reply, they have really expanded our curatorial lens, chiefly my curatorial lens and perspective that is shaping our publishing program. So they're broadening our world, and they're broadening the entry point to our list, and wonderfully so. So it's been wonderful, actually. Oh, thank you for that, Nell. And another of you asked if Painting the Walls is the working title that David Rhodes submitted. How will we decide on the final title? Great question. It was the working title until he submitted the manuscript, at which time the title was Cage Making. I just can't see publishing a book with the title Cage Making. No matter how appropriate it is for the contents of the book, it's too forbidding and not inviting enough. And so we have a list of about a dozen or so now. When I was working with David to develop the manuscript, I usually take a lot of notes. I'm writing descriptive copy as I'm writing an editorial letter. And I'm also, if I think the book maybe needs a subtitle or needs a new title, I'm brainstorming those. And then I'll go back to the author and say, your decision in the end, to be completely clear. But my recommendation would be that you reconsider the title for these reasons. And more often than not, authors are willing to engage in that dialogue, and usually to retitle the books. And when they're not, we go with their title. It's their work. We copyright it. The books are all copyrighted in the author's names. And we have a very respectful editorial approach in terms of working with our authors. And so that's how that happens. One of you has asked if there's a list or synopsis available of the books we'll be publishing this year. Wouldn't be hard to assemble one, but we don't publish a catalog anymore. That's not done as often as it used to be. We'll assemble one and share it following this. It's easily accomplished. Thank you for that question and request. That's good. Yes, and then one of my favorite subjects, one of you was asked about the covers and asked me to speak to the collaboration between our art director and the author. It's a highly collaborative process, and our creative director, Mary Austin Speaker, we're very fortunate to have her. She's one of the best in the business. She was before she joined our team, and she first started with us as a freelancer. And then she's so talented and such a beautiful human being and such a pleasure to work with that I was able to convince her to join the team. And she now designs all of our covers and most of the interiors. And then and she does so in a highly collaborative way, working with the author. What we're trying to accomplish with a cover to a book is a cover that would encourage a reader to pick a book up from a crowded table. Crowded by competition, that is, and take a look at it. Pick it up, take a look at it. So it needs to be intriguing and inviting, regardless of the cover's relationship to the contents, what the book is about. But also, the cover needs to be an accurate representation in some way of what's happening in the book. And so that when you finish reading the book, the cover makes that much more sense to you, even if you bought the book only because of the cover. And of course, along the way, finding a visual representation for what's happening in words is a challenging exercise. And it requires a lot of collaboration, a lot of creativity, and a lot of persistence, because it's not uncommon for us to look at 30 or 40 possible cover designs before we settle on the one we think is right. And through that process, I'm active in the process in my role as publisher. That's part of my job. Our marketing director, Yana, is part of that because we want to sell our books. We want to reach readers with our books. And our marketing director is the closest to our sales force and to the marketplace. And so her perspective is in there. Mary's perspective is in there, and the author's perspective is in there. And Mary puts all of that into her pot and cooks up beautiful, beautiful covers. So that's always a really fun part of what we do. Another question. This is a really rich and interesting one. How does the developmental and editorial process change when working on a second or third or fourth and so on book? Well, it varies from writer to writer, as so much does. But in my experience, more often than not, the trust is a really important part of that process. Trust and mutual respect in every way. So that I approach editing manuscripts. My fundamental attitude in approaching editing manuscripts is that my job is never to impose my vision on what the writer is trying to accomplish, but rather to try to understand what the writer is trying to accomplish and then encouraging them to accomplish it more fully. And so sometimes that is addition, which is to say, I think your manuscript would benefit from more composition, in this or that way, or a new character, or a new subject line, a new thematic. Other times it's deletion. This part of the story isn't working, this part is. The same with poems. I feel as if this part of your collection is a bit incomplete, or I feel as if this part of the manuscript is simply overwritten and detracts from the whole. And then in the end, and we engage, and our editors at large, we engage contract editors, and we have other editors on staff as well. One of our fundamental operating principles is that we are here to serve writers. We're not here to impose anything. And so, and I make that very clear right from the beginning of the process, and that the decisions are the authors to make. The recommendations are mine and ours to make, but the decisions are theirs. And so that requires a lot of trust. And typically, if a first book and a first editorial process has gone very well, both sides, author, publisher, would like to work together again and have a better understanding of the way we think and work. And in the best cases, the process gets richer every time, and so do the products. And that happens more often than not in my experience. But it is a really interesting it's an interesting kind of work because it entails creative and critical thinking simultaneously. And so I find it really, I came to Milkweed as a working editor. I still find that part of my job most interesting. And although all of this is interesting. But yeah, thank you for that question. Let's see. I know I'm missing some. Thank you so much for all these good questions. Oh, yes, another good question. Will any of these authors have readings, hopefully in person during this year? Absolutely. I'm convinced they will. To this point, almost all, we did have almost all of the events we have co-hosted until very recently have been virtual, which is a mixed blessing. In-person events are so much richer, we all know, as this would be. And yet, we can reach more readers with virtual events. And so, in some ways, we've benefited from them. But I know just in the last couple of weeks, two of our poets who have new books had readings in bookstores with other poets. Most of the attendees, I think there was a mask policy. So in the two I'm thinking of, all the attendees at the reading were masked. The reader obviously was not. And I'm really hopeful that we're planning to reopen Open Book here in downtown Minneapolis in April. We're planning to reopen our bookstore in April. We have some events planned beginning in April. And I'm really hopeful that writers and readers will be out there engaging with communities in person far more this year. It's been missed. It's been hugely missed. And I really miss it. I'm really excited about it. I also miss doing this kind of event in person. And I look forward to that too. It's so people intensive, everything we do. So thank you for that question. And let me say again, before Anna moves me along wisely, that I really appreciate your attention and time today. I really appreciate your support, those of you who are supporting our work. And thank you. Thanks for the time and the opportunity.
That was a good place to end. This is a hopeful note. And I just glanced out the window and it's snowing, so now I'm not as hopeful. But thanks, Daniel. Before we go, I also want to thank M. Herring, our advancement fellow, who is behind the scenes today, ensuring everything runs smoothly. Thanks, M. Even if my PowerPoint slide skills were not the best, you did a great job. And I'll reiterate, Daniel, thanks again. Please feel free to email, call me if you have any follow-up questions or think of something after the fact. And we look forward to sharing these books with you over the course of the year. Thank you.